Orton-Gillingham is an educational approach that is language-based. It is multisensory, structured, sequential, cumulative, cognitive, and flexible. Hello, I'm Wendy with READ, Reading and Educational Assistance for Dyslexia. Today we're going to discuss how to implement and track the sight word study method or learned word study method we introduced in the last video. First, you want to be sure to start with a list of words, a scope and sequence, because you want to have your whole game plan printed out and prepared ahead of time before you implement it with your student or your child if you're homeschooling them. So first of all, create the list of words you want your child to work on that are sight words. Now, in the list that I used through the training I received, nearly all of the words that are on my list are truly learned words or sight words. They're not high frequency words. There are a few high frequency words in there, but most of them are not. And so you want to really think about where you want to implement, or where you want to invest your time with this method, because it can be a little bit tedious, and so you want to do it with words that they truly need to use this method for. And you want to save the words, high frequency words, where they're going to get introduced to the concept later. You want to save it for that concept so that you can use that concept to decode and encode many of the words that follow that pattern. So I would highly recommend using words that are truly learned words, sight words, or read words, however you want to refer to it. So what I do first of all, after I developed my scope and sequence, or you go through your scope and sequence of your curriculum, I print my cards out on 4x6, or my words out on 4x6 cards. And I have 3 division cards with my words. I have mastered, I have spelling, and I have reading. And initially, all of my words are going to go behind reading, because my student needs to be able to read all of those words before they get moved into the spelling pile. And then once they can then correctly decode those words, and they get moved in the spelling pile, and then once they can correctly encode those words, which means spell those words, then it's going to get moved into the mastered pile. So I print them all out on 4x6 cards. Now here's the actual font I use, which is Century Gothic, which is an easy to read font for people with dyslexia. And then I print them as big as I possibly can and get the word on the card, but I allow myself enough room for us to make notes and maybe do a pronunciation of the word on the card, and that sort of thing. So I make it big enough for them to trace with and tap on, but not so big that we can't do some other things with that card down the road. So again, I have a mastered card, a spelling card, and a reading card, so that I can keep track of where they are with each of those words. So all the words get printed. They initially start at the back with reading, and then they move up as they progress through decoding, encoding, and then they've got a master. See here how I have on this sheet the level 3 learned words, and I have the words listed to the left, and then I have a column for read and a column for spell. And the reason why I do this is when we introduce a new word, we always want the student to be able to read it first. Then once they've mastered reading that word and being able to decode it, then we want them to work on spelling it. So I put 5 boxes, because each time they successfully read that word, I'm going to give a check, and then they graduate from that word and it moves on to the spelling pile once they've successfully decoded it automatically 5 times. Now once they get really good at this, you don't always have to have them do it 5 times. If they get really good at this and they can comfortably do it 3 times and you're like, yep, you've got it, we can move on, then sometimes you can only have to do it 3 times with a student, but you have to use discretion and be a student by student basis with that. So once they've mastered reading it, then you move it to spelling. And then once they've done that, the 3 times or the 5 times, you've moved it on to the mastered pile, and you mark that box there for mastered. Now once they've mastered it, you don't want to just assume they're always going to remember it. You want to sneak that word back in your lesson from time to time to have a refresher. So have it in the reading section of your lesson, have it in the spelling section of your lesson, but don't ever assume that once they've mastered it, they've got it forever. You want to sneak it in there once in a while just to make sure that it stays in their memory. Here, I'm going to show you an example of a sheet that I'm using with a student currently. And as you can see here in this column in level 1, when I first start working with that student, I go through the whole list and I see what they can correctly decode automatically and which ones they can't. So as you can see, this student here knew these words already automatically, so I moved it automatically over to the spelling pile. If they couldn't, you can see here, the student could not decode the word was. So then when I introduced it using the learned word study method, and then she was able to read it when I tested her the first time. And then she was able to do it again. And then the third lesson we had, she wasn't able to decode it. So I put a little X here just to remind me, okay, on that third try, she wasn't able to do it. And so that reminds me that, oh, maybe we need to make sure we really go over learned word study method with it, discuss that word, discuss why it might be spelled the way it is and why it's not decodable. And then, as you can see, this student then went on to decode it correctly several more times. And I actually had that student do it a couple of extra times past 5. Then, once they've mastered it, and you can see here where they really struggled with the word goes. And so I like to see where they really struggle, because this word here, I really might want to make sure shows up a lot in our lesson. Decoding it, encoding it, and maybe in their dictation sentence that's going to show up, just so they can get some repetition and familiarity with that word in context. Then what happens is once they've mastered the reading, then we go over and we start working on spelling. Sometimes on words that are word families or related to each other in some way, I will diagram out that word on the back of the flashcard for the student. So we have the word here, one. And if you think of the word one, it's in several other words, learned words, and it's not pronounced one when you get to them, but it still has the same spelling. And it's important to know that this is related to those words in meaning. And so let's take a look at here how I've diagrammed this. We have the word one. We have the word done, which means there's none left to do, or all there's no one left to do. And then none means there aren't any of. And so these words are related to this base word here and the spelling of this word. And even though it's not pronounced the same, none is not the same as one, and done is not the same as one, they're still related in spelling and meaning. So it's important sometimes to point this out to a student, because now that they've had this word mastered as a learned word, this will be easier for them to master, and this will be easier for them to master when it comes to spelling it, because they know that they're related. So this is another way you can mark up a card to help them understand that word a little bit better. Another thing you can do is, like for the 3 theirs, we have there. You can have them draw an arrow in the R, because that represents location. And you can have them think of a sentence. Over there is my pencil, or something like that. You can even have them write a sentence with you. And then we have the word there, like in, we are going to their house. Well, there relates to people. So in the I, we're going to make that person, we're going to draw a person in that I there. And then we get to the word there, the contraction there for they are. So then we explain what a contraction is, and it's 2 words put together into one. And so we have they and we have are, and when we contract it or shrink it down, we're getting rid of letters, and to represent that we've gotten rid of letters, we're going to put the apostrophe. I always put a rubber band on my card for my students. This reminds them that it's a contraction, and I explain when you stretch that rubber band and then you let it go back into its size, it's contracting or getting smaller to help them remember what a contraction is. So this is just another tool for them to remember that this is a contraction and it represents two words shrunk down or squeezed into one word. So I hope that explaining how I implement my learned word spelling list and reading list, also known as sight words or red words, can help direct a student's learning with these words and how to systematically track what you've introduced, what they've learned, and what you need to continue to work on, and then what you need to re-expose them to from time to time so that they don't forget how to encode and decode those words because they don't follow the typical concepts of the English language. Purchase my learned word scope and sequence tracking pages at teacherspayteachers.com. The link is in the description below.